If someone missed the video in 2 parts, then a hint has been made for you in the upper right corner. Heimdall informs the Buddha that he cannot fight for humanity because he breaks the rules. However, Zeus intervenes in the conversation, who allows the Buddha to stand against the gods, referring to the rules of Ragnarok. Odin asks the Buddha if he is ready to become enemies for all the gods. However, the Buddha does not care, because he never hated the gods and admires only himself. Buddha asks Zeus who will be his opponent. Then rays of light appeared in the sky, and then a ship descended to the earth. 7 gods of happiness enter the arena from it, but Heimdall warns them that only one can fight. Their leader Valkyrie says that they are one. When he removes his armor, his team begins to inhabit him, creating a powerful beam of light around him. All the rays are combined into one sphere, from the fragments of which appears the opponent of the Buddha, the god of misfortune Zerofuku. He immediately says that he wants to destroy the Buddha, and therefore begins to warm up, because he has not been on Earth for hundreds of years. He forms an axe from his body to prepare for battle. Gear tells Brynhilde that merging all 7 gods is not fair, but it turns out that the 7 lucky gods were just a temporary form, and Zerofuku is their true form of existence. Brynhilde explains that Zerofuku was once a kind god who wanted to spread happiness, but ended up being changed due to grief. We are told the story of Zerofuku when he was still a teenager. Every day he tried to make the world a better place and did good deeds, and this day was no exception. He saw a little chick that had fallen out of the nest and helped him get back home. Then Zerofuku lay on the ground and felt happy from what helps this world. One day he descended from heaven to earth, and a terrible sight was revealed to him. People suffered from unknown diseases and were unhappy. Then Zerofuku realized that in order to bring happiness to people, he must remove the source of unhappiness. He approached the boy and stretched out his hand over him to take his misfortune for himself. The boy immediately felt better and even began to run for happiness. People began to worship him, deifying him, and then Zerofuku realized that he could help all these people simply by absorbing their misfortunes. After a few years, he absorbed a lot of misfortune that he himself began to suffer from it. He returns to the city, wanting to see how people are doing now. However, they reveal the whole human essence. The less misfortunes people had, the more they began to forget about the true meaning of happiness, starting to succumb to sins. He is accidentally hit by the guy's shoulder, causing Zerofuku to fall to the ground. Then he recognized in this man the boy who he helped many years ago. Zerofuku decides to ask how he's doing, but he doesn't even remember him and tells him to leave. This shocks Zerofuku, as he saved people from all the troubles, but they never became happy, but rather became even more unhappy. At this moment, the Buddha passes with his disciples. Even though the people behind the Buddha looked miserable and poor, Zerofuku saw the happiness on their faces, unlike the people in the city. Zerofuku asks the Buddha why people with the Buddha look happier than the people he helped by absorbing their misfortunes. The Buddha invites him to join them in order to achieve enlightenment and says that happiness cannot be conveyed. You need to achieve it yourself, also supplementing this with the fact that where there is light, there is darkness. This shocked Zerofuku, and he ran away with tears in his eyes, jealous of the Buddha, because he saw that a person was able to make people around him happy, despite the fact that this was Zerofuku's life mission. He cries by the river, and negative energy hovers around him, which entered his soul, and now his love of making people happy has become hatred, and he has become the very Zerofuku who hates happiness. Several people see him in the forest and start running away as they saw the monster. He is going to destroy the child, but the mother began to protect him by covering him with her hands. This put Zerofuku into a stupor, and he began to resist the desire to destroy humanity, and therefore divided himself into 7 gods of happiness. Meanwhile, Zerofuku decides to get even with Buddha, but he attacks first, knocking him down. The Buddha calls on Zerofuku to fight on as the fight is just beginning. Zerofuku then attacks with his axe, but Buddha easily dodges his attacks thanks to his eye feature. Zerofuku unleashes more and more attacks, but Buddha dodges everyone without any problem. This makes Zerofuku sad, and his axe begins to grow larger. Then Zeus explained that the axe absorbs misfortune, and the more Zerofuku experiences misfortune, the larger the axe becomes and the greater its destructive power. The axe gets bigger and Zerofuku continues to miss, because every time he misses it is a misfortune for him, and the longer the fight drags on, the worse it is for the Buddha. Gear is surprised by the Buddha's reflexes, but Brynhilde reveals his ability to dodge so deftly. It's in his eyes. They give him the ability to foresee the future. Zerofuku keeps missing and asks the Buddha why he only dodges his attacks. At this moment, the Buddha counterattacks Zerofuku, saying that he is his own master. The Buddha continues to attack him, and it seemed that the victory was already on the side of the Buddha. But Zerofuku remembers his past failures, and this makes him more unhappy. Then he releases all his power, and the axe absorbs all his misfortune, and becomes very huge. Zerofuku swings this axe at the Buddha, but he can only accept this desperation and activate his staff. The axe seemed to destroy the Buddha, but he was protected by a shield that transformed from a staff. Brynhilde explains that the Staff of the Six Worlds is a divine treasure that contains the powers of the six Buddhist guardians, and it changes shape depending on the emotions of the Buddha. Buddha throws the axe back, and Zerofuku turns it into a sword. Then the Buddha uses the second form of the Six Worlds and turns the staff into a club. Zerofuku decides to attack Buddha, but he dodges and retaliates, knocking Zerofuku down. Then we are told the story of the Buddha. People called him Siddhartha Gautama, and he was a prince of the Shakya clan in ancient northern India. From birth, he wanted nothing and had everything: the best clothes, the best food, the best housing, the best education. One evening, his father tells him about his destiny to become the king of the whole world. He feeds the poor people, saying that it is the duty of the royal family to bring people happiness. One day, he notices a flying free bird that has no obligations to anyone, but he is suddenly destroyed by another bird. At that moment, his ideas about his purpose were shaken. He comes to visit his distant cousin Jataka. They began to discuss Siddhartha's destiny to become the king of the whole world. Siddhartha thinks Jataka is happy as his kingdom is prosperous. However, Jataka believes that he was unlucky, as he is seriously ill and all his life he took care of the people of his kingdom. But he himself never saw this world. The next day, Jataka leaves for another world, and the whole kingdom mourns this loss, thinking that he lived his happy life. But only Siddhartha knew that this was not so. At that moment, he gets off his horse and starts laughing out loud, saying that he has achieved enlightenment. Siddhartha comes to the funeral, where he scatters flower petals everywhere. He takes the body of the Jataka, and this causes condemnation from the people. But Siddhartha does not care, because he knows that the Jataka does not need prayers, because happiness is inside him. Siddhartha leaves his body in the river and sends Jataka to explore the beauties of this world. This forever changed his outlook on life, and he goes far from civilization, leaving everything he had. He finds a group of people who crave enlightenment by depriving themselves of food. Siddhartha gives one of them food, which is why he was condemned by their leader, but Siddhartha just wants to feed him. Then the group starts to follow him, and he teaches them to rest and relax. One evening, people sacrifice a woman to the gods, but Siddhartha intervenes and saves the woman. Believers threaten him with the wrath of a god, but he would gladly fight the gods. Brynhilde explains that the Buddha despises anyone who denies their inner happiness or imposes the concept of fate on others, and it is for this reason that he opposes the gods. Zerofuku continues to attack Buddha, but also fails to hit him. This causes him to change the shape of his weapon, splitting it into two swords. The Buddha decided to fight on equal terms and change weapons, and therefore turned his staff into the shape of a sword. They exchange attacks, and it seems that their strength is equal, but the Buddha still has a slight advantage due to the eyes. Buddha injures Zerofuku, and this angers him even more, so he turns the weapon into many blades. He attacks Buddha with them, but he turned his staff into a sword that is able to withstand these blades and destroy them. The Buddha shortened Zerofuku's weapon, and they came face to face. People supported the Buddha, which annoyed Zerofuku as no one paid attention to him like many years ago. Enraged, he extends his axe and nearly hits the Buddha. In response, the Buddha tells him to learn to love himself. However, Zerofuku considers this nonsense and continues to attack the opponent. Buddha defends himself by saying that he likes Zerofuku. This shocked Zerofuku, as he was the only one who told him this. He thinks that the Buddha is lying, but looking at his sincerely joyful face, he realized that he wanted to be like the Buddha that everyone loves. Gradually, his weapons begin to disappear, and the Buddha discards his staff, because he wants to fight on equal terms. They begin to exchange blows, and Zerofuku realizes that the Buddha is the only one who understands him. And therefore, when the Buddha knocks out Zerofuku, he feels the happiest in this world. People support the Buddha, and the negative energy leaves Zerofuku, making him the very teenager who wants to make this world happy. However, his demonic horns are attracted to him and hurt him. From his body, 2 dragons fly out and surround Zerofuku and create a sphere around him. A huge demon emerges from the orb, which causes the Buddha to jump aside, as he was unable to predict his next actions. Buddha asks the demon where Zerofuku is, but he replies that he is no more, and he himself is the lord of the demonic world, and his name is Papias. Papias himself does not know why he is in this world, but he really wants to test what his body is capable of. Ares asks the gods who this Papias is. However, no one knows or heard anything about him. At this moment, Hades arrives, who says that Papias is a legendary berserker from the underworld, where demons live. And even though Hades is the king of the underworld, he had never seen Papias before and thought they were just fairy tales. Papias starts to attack the Buddha, but he was able to defend himself. Then Papias unleashed a flurry of attacks on him, and the Buddha continued to defend himself. However, Brynhilde explains that the Buddha cannot predict the opponent's movements, as he only sees the flicker of the soul. When someone wants to do something, his soul starts to move before the body. The Buddha is able to see this radiance of the soul, and that is why he can predict the future. Since there is not a drop of light in Papias, he cannot see it. Papias is surprised that the Buddha has defended himself against all of his attacks, so he decides to fight at full strength. Then Papias turns his hand into a huge drill and attacks the Buddha. But the Buddha at the last moment managed to turn his staff into a shield, but this did not help him either, as the drill penetrates the shield and damages the left eye of the Buddha. Papias is shocked that the Buddha managed to dodge his attack as he was aiming for the head. He then turns his hand into an axe and proceeds to quickly attack him, further damaging the Buddha. Ares is surprised how strong Papias is. Hades, on the other hand, says that an ordinary god cannot be compared with the power of Papias, because he is a real monster who once destroyed half of the underworld. In fact, the second half of hell was just lucky, because he made a real havoc in hell, but suddenly disappeared. This happened hundreds of years before Hades became the ruler of the underworld. He suggested why Papias is in the arena. Someone had obtained a tiny fragment of this great demon, who created its seed to then plant it on the god, which turned out to be Zerofuku. Ares asks who is capable of this, but Hades has already guessed who likes such madness. This was done by the god Beelzebub, who is just interested to see what happens, and anyone could be the carrier of the demon. Meanwhile, the fight continues in the arena, where Papias was able to injure the Buddha's leg. The Buddha already has a lot of damage, which affects his well-being. He calls for Zerofuku, as he believes that he is sitting in the depths of Papias' soul. However, Papias only laughs in response, saying that he has already eaten Zerofuku and digested it. This infuriates the Buddha, and for the first time in many centuries he felt hatred, and therefore threatens to destroy Papias, and his staff turns into a scythe with a lion's head. Papias is surprised that an ordinary god would challenge such a higher being as he is, and therefore he gladly accepts the challenge. Buddha decides to attack him, but Papias easily blocks the blow. Then he finally wants to destroy Papias, and therefore uses a powerful technique, and his staff began to spew fire, which gives acceleration to the staff. However, Papias blocks the blow with his hand and damages the Buddha. Papias asks for his last words, but the Buddha only comes closer and says that it is he who will save humanity. Then Papias pushes him away with his foot, and the Buddha is seriously injured, but is not going to give up. The Buddha felt the fear of Papias, but he only denies this, saying that he is a higher being who has surpassed his former self in strength, since his body could not contain all the power. Now he has a powerful body and wonders why he should be afraid of a pitiful god. The Buddha calls him weak, even weaker than Zerofuku. This infuriates Papias, and he unleashes a flurry of attacks on him as if spewing flames, and the enlightened Buddha absorbs this hellish flame. Ares already thinks that Buddha is finished, but Hades calls him a fool, because in the eyes of the Buddha there is no hint that he wants to give up. Zeus adds that the Buddha is waiting for a certain moment to change the course of the battle, Papilius pushes the Buddha away, but he remains on his feet, which angers Papias even more. The Buddha asks the opponent to continue in the same vein, which causes fear in Papias as his hands are trembling. He refuses to believe it, so he injures his hand and turns it into a sword. The Buddha then decides to attack, but Papilius defends himself and breaks the Buddha's scythe. This causes the staff to revert to its true form, and Papilius immediately attacks the Buddha, causing the staff to be destroyed. It seemed that the end of the Buddha had already come, and Papilius was going to destroy him. But at that moment the Buddha sees a vision where the luminous ball is behind him. He decides to touch him, but someone's hand grabs him, causing the Buddha to come to his senses. He starts laughing out loud, and Papilius thinks he's gone crazy. The Buddha says that he has overcome his immaturity, which causes his scrunchie to break, and he stands up in a new form. He takes the weapon to Zerofuku, urging him to fight alongside him. When he activates his new weapon, he begins to absorb the love of the Buddha instead of misfortune, turning it into a divine treasure. This weapon is shaped like a sword and has the power of the 7 gods of happiness. The Buddha continues to fight with Papilius, and now their powers are equal. However, people begin to support the Buddha, which gives even more power, as his new sword absorbs love. Papias, on the other hand, wonders how the Buddha continues to fight, because recently he lay already exhausted. Kojiro believes Buddha has a chance to win, as he is blind in one eye and has multiple injuries. Papilius decides to use his powerful technique, but Buddha manages to defend himself by inflicting even more damage on him. However, the Buddha was able to parry the attack and deliver a counterpunch that deals the first damage to Papilius. Papilius believes that it was impossible to repel his most powerful technique, which causes even more anger, and he continues to bombard the Buddha with a flurry of attacks. The gods say that the Buddha can no longer withstand another powerful attack, but Hades says that he only needs to dodge. The Buddha, on the other hand, begins to see a small light in his soul due to fear, and therefore evades attacks. This upsets Papias, and he decides to end the fight, and therefore cuts the Buddha in half. This shocked everyone, and Papilius was already beginning to rejoice, but the body of the Buddha suddenly disappears, and he appears behind him. He strikes a decisive blow that gives victory to humanity. People are celebrating the victory, but Papilius cannot accept defeat, and therefore, with his last strength, attacks the Buddha. However, he does not have time to do this, as his soul evaporated. At this moment, he notices Zerofuku, who happily goes to the 7 gods of happiness, and together they fly away to Valhalla. Buddha cries of happiness, calling Zerofuku cool. Thus, the Buddha is the winner of the battle and compares the score with the gods 3-3. Brynhilde and Geir approach him to congratulate him on his victory, but he suddenly falls to the ground due to his injuries. Medical help comes to him, and he tells Brynhilde not to be serious about her goals. The gods see that the score is getting even, and therefore Zeus says that they need to win the next fight by all means. Then Hades decides to fight in the next battle to avenge his brother Poseidon. This news shocks all the gods, as well as Geir, who does not know a person who can defeat Hades. However, Brynhilde already knows who will fight the Lord of the Underworld. This man is the first king of mankind, and it is he who will be able to resist Hades. If you want to continue, then write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like and press the bell so as not to miss new videos. AniMap was with you. Bye everyone.